At 2:47 in the morning on October 18, 2019, Mark Davidson woke up to a sound that would change everything. His phone was vibrating on the nightstand, glowing in the darkness of his bedroom. He reached for it with one hand, his wife Lauren still asleep beside him, her breathing slow and steady. The text message was from her number, but she was right there, lying next to him, her phone on her own nightstand across the bed. Mark's heart started pounding as he read the words on his screen. "I know what you did." And so does she. Within 48 hours, his best friend would be dead. His wife would vanish without a trace. And the police would find something in his basement that nobody, not the detectives, not the forensiers, not even Mark himself, could fully explain. This is the story of two men who trusted each other with absolutely everything, who built their lives side by side for more than 20 years, until one of them made a choice that would end in blood, in grief, and in a truth so devastating that it would haunt everyone who heard it. Stay with me, because what really happened that night is far worse than anything you're imagining right now. Before we go any further, there are 3 questions you need to be asking yourself as we move through this story. Who sent that text message at 2:47 in the morning? What was Mark Davidson hiding that was so terrible someone felt the need to expose it in the middle of the night? And why did his best friend, a man he'd known since childhood, have to die? By the end of this video, you'll know the answer to all 3 of those questions. But I can promise you right now, you will not see any of it coming. Let me take you back to where it all started, to a quiet street in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to 2 boys who grew up 3 houses apart, and to one woman who would eventually stand at the center of a tragedy that no one could have predicted. Mark Davidson and Jake Porter were not just friends. They were brothers in every way that mattered. They grew up on the same street in a working-class neighborhood in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where everyone knew everyone and your reputation meant everything. They played on the same Little League baseball team when they were 8 years old. They went to the same high school, sat next to each other in algebra class, got detention together for sneaking out during lunch. After high school, they both got into Penn State, class of 1996, and they roomed together all 4 years. People who knew them back then said you couldn't find one without the other. They were that close. After graduation, life pulled them in different directions the way it does for most people. Mark became a contractor. He liked working with his hands, building things from the ground up, seeing something real and solid take shape under his effort. He married his high school sweetheart, Lauren, a woman with a warm smile and a sharp mind who worked in marketing. They had a daughter, Emma, who became the center of their world. Jake, on the other hand, went corporate. He became a financial analyst, crunching numbers, managing portfolios, making good money, but never really settling down. He never married, never had kids, but he was always around, always part of the family. Every Friday night, without fail, Mark and Jake would meet at Donovan's pub on the edge of town. 2 beers, 2 hours, 20 years of history between them. They'd talk about work, about life, about sports, about nothing and everything. It was their ritual, their constant, the one thing that never changed no matter what else was happening in their lives. Lauren loved Jake too. He wasn't just Mark's friend. He was family. He was Emma's godfather. He'd been Mark's best man at the wedding. Lauren used to joke that Jake was the brother she never had, and Jake would laugh and say he was lucky to have them because they were the closest thing to a real family he'd ever known. For years, everything was good. Everything was stable. Everything made sense. That was before the summer of 2019. In June of 2019, Mark started noticing that something was off. It was small things at first, the kind of things you might brush off or rationalize away because you don't want to believe what they might mean. Lauren was distant. She wasn't cold exactly, but there was a space between them that hadn't been there before. She was checking her phone constantly, more than usual, and when he'd ask who she was texting, she'd say it was work. She started coming home late from what she called work dinners, and Mark believed her because she'd just been promoted to senior account manager, and he knew that came with more responsibility, longer hours, more pressure. At first, he didn't think much of it. He trusted her. He'd always trusted her. But then Jake stopped showing up to their Friday night meetings at Donovan's pub. The first time, he texted Mark an hour before they were supposed to meet and said he was feeling sick. The second time, he said he was busy with a big project at work and couldn't get away. By the third time, Mark knew something was wrong. Jake never missed their Friday nights. Not for work, not for anything. Mark tried calling him a few times, but Jake's responses were short, clipped, distant. Everything okay? Yeah, man, just busy. We good? Of course. Just got a lot going on. Mark wanted to believe him, but doubt, once it takes root, is hard to shake. So one Thursday night in August, Mark did something he'd never done before in 15 years of marriage. He followed his wife. Before we continue deeper into what Mark discovered that night, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Mark followed Lauren's car for 20 minutes through town. She drove past the grocery store where they did their weekly shopping, past Emma's middle school, past the park where they used to take her when she was little, and then she turned into an apartment complex on the east side of Harrisburg, a place Mark had no reason to know, no reason to recognize, and that's when he saw it. Lauren's car pulled into a parking spot near the back of the lot, and right next to it, already parked, was Jake's car. Mark felt his chest tighten. His hands gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He pulled into a spot across the lot where he could see but wouldn't be seen, and he sat there in the darkness, waiting. 2 hours passed. He didn't move, didn't turn on the radio, didn't check his phone. He just watched that apartment building, watched the light glowing in one of the second-floor windows, and imagined what was happening inside. At 11:47 at night, the door to the building opened, and Lauren and Jake came out together. They were talking, laughing, standing close, too close. Jake said something, and Lauren smiled, the kind of smile Mark hadn't seen from her in months. She touched his arm, just for a second, but it was enough. Mark didn't confront them. He didn't jump out of his truck and start yelling. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat there, frozen, watching the two people he trusted most in the world walk to their cars and drive away in opposite directions. Then he started his truck and drove home. And that's when the darkness started. For 3 weeks, Mark said nothing. He went to work every morning, came home every night, ate dinner with his family, kissed his wife goodnight, helped his daughter with her homework. On the surface, everything looked normal, but inside, something had broken. Mark couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He'd lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over in his mind. Lauren and Jake, together, laughing, touching, betraying him. He started searching online late at night when Lauren was asleep. How to catch a cheater, private investigator costs, divorce laws in Pennsylvania. He read articles about surveillance, about gathering evidence, about protecting yourself legally, and then one night, he searched something else. How long does it take for someone to disappear? He didn't know why he searched it. Or maybe he did. Maybe some part of him, the part that was burning with rage and humiliation, already knew what he wanted to do. On October 16th, Mark sent Jake a text message. "Hey man, can we talk? I need some advice." Jake responded within minutes. "Of course." "What's going on?" Mark typed back. "I think Lauren's cheating on me. I don't know what to do." There was a pause. Then Jake replied, "Come over tonight. We'll figure it out." Mark stared at that message for a long time. Then he typed, "Thanks, brother. I'll be there at 8. That was the last normal conversation they would ever have. Mark arrived at Jake's apartment at 8:03 that night. He knocked on the door 3 times, slow and deliberate. Jake opened it with a concerned look on his face, the kind of look a best friend gives when he's worried about you, when he wants to help. He had no idea what was coming. "Come in, man. You okay?" Jake stepped aside and Mark walked into the apartment, his hands in his pockets, his jaw tight. They sat down in the living room. Jake offered him a beer. Mark declined. "So what's going on?" Jake asked. "Talk to me." Mark looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "I know." Jake's face didn't change right away. There was a flicker of confusion, then recognition, then fear. "Know what?" Mark's voice was calm, too calm. "I know about you and Lauren." The room went silent. Jake opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Mark, I can explain." Mark stood up. His hands were shaking now, but his voice stayed steady. "You're my brother, Jake. I trusted you with everything. My family, my life. And you did this?" Jake stood too, holding his hands up like he was trying to calm a situation that was already far beyond calming. "It's not what you think. We didn't." Mark didn't let him finish. He lunged forward, grabbing Jake by the collar and slamming him against the wall. The sound echoed through the apartment. "You're a liar." Jake didn't fight back. He just stood there, tears in his eyes, and said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." And that's when everything went wrong. The police found Jake Porter's body in Mark's basement 4 days later, on October 20th. A neighbor had called in a wellness check after noticing Mark hadn't left his house in days, and there was a smell coming from the property. When officers arrived, Mark answered the door calmly, almost robotically, and said, "He's downstairs." The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The medical examiner determined that Jake had been struck multiple times with a heavy object, later identified as a crowbar that Mark kept in his garage. Mark was arrested on the spot. He didn't resist, didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't say a word. It looked like an open and shut case. A man murders his best friend after discovering an affair with his wife. Motive, means, opportunity, all there. But then the detectives interviewed Lauren, and that's when everything, every assumption, every piece of the puzzle they thought they'd put together, fell apart. Lauren sat in the interrogation room, her face pale, her hands shaking, and she told them the truth. There was no affair. She and Jake were not sleeping together. They had never been romantic, not once. The detectives didn't believe her at first. They'd seen the evidence. The late-night meetings, the text messages, the apartment visits. But Lauren explained everything. In May of 2019, Jake had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He had 6 months to live, maybe less. He didn't want to tell Mark because he didn't want to burden him, didn't want Mark to watch him die slowly. But Jake wanted to do something for the family he loved. He wanted to set up a trust fund for Emma, Mark, and Lauren's daughter, so that she'd be taken care of, so that she could go to college, so that she'd have a future even after he was gone. That's what the late-night meetings were. Meetings with lawyers, financial planners, estate attorneys. Jake was putting his entire savings, over $400,000, into a trust for Emma. And he'd asked Lauren to help him because he didn't want Mark to know until it was done. He wanted it to be a surprise, a gift, one last act of love for the brother he'd never had by blood but had chosen every single day of his life. The affair that Mark thought he saw, the betrayal that consumed him, that drove him to murder, it never existed. Jake wasn't trying to destroy Mark's family. He was trying to save it. Mark Davidson is currently serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was convicted of second-degree murder in March of 2020. Lauren divorced him while he was awaiting trial. She moved out of state with Emma, trying to rebuild their lives far away from the tragedy that had torn them apart. Emma refuses to visit her father. She has not spoken to him since the trial. She refuses to even say his name. And Jake's final wish, the thing he spent the last months of his life working toward, came true. Emma received the full trust fund, $400,000, which will pay for her college education and give her a start in life that Jake wanted her to have. But here's the question I keep coming back to, the question that haunts everyone who knows this story. If Mark had just talked to Jake, if he had just asked one question, if he had just trusted the man who had never once in 20 years given him a reason not to, would any of this have happened? Would Jake still be alive? Would Mark be free? Would that family still be whole? The answer, of course, is yes. All of it could have been avoided. But Mark chose to believe the worst. He chose suspicion over trust. He chose violence over conversation. And in doing so, he destroyed everything he'd ever loved. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Do you believe Mark deserves life in prison for what he did? Or was this a tragedy that could have been prevented if he'd just asked the right questions? And if this story left you thinking, wait until you see what we're covering next week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the next one.